Hello, everybody. Hi, I think we're live. My name is Nyasha Kadandara, and welcome to Our New Realities, where we're going to be talking about equity, diversity in the immersive world. I'm also the director of Lelac, which was a production from Electric South, and also a former New Dimensions artist from the 2017 cohort. I'd like to introduce you to some of our panelists for today, and then we're going to catch up, see where everybody is, and then dive into the discussion. At any point in time, if you feel like asking a question to any one of us, please feel free to send your questions either via Facebook or in the chat on the Zoom call as well. So first up, we have Kamal Sinclair, who is making the world more beautiful as the executive director of the Guild for Future Architects, supporting independent artists as a senior consultant for Sundance Institute's Future Culture Initiative, and making art through a family creative practice at Sinclair Films. She also serves as an external advisor to the MacArthur Foundation's Journalism and Media Program and as a board member to MIT's Center for Advanced Virtual Reality. And previously, she served as the director for Sundance Institute's New Frontiers Lab program, which many of you have heard about. Next, we have, and Kamal is joining us from the United States. Now on to Nigeria, we have Joel Kachi Benson, who is passionate about stories and has been making documentary stories for over a decade. In February 2018, he was introduced to the world of virtual reality and became the first Nigerian filmmaker to use VR technology for storytelling in his film In Bakassi, a virtual experience on the life of one of Northeast Nigeria's largest IDP camps. He then went on to win the prestigious award, the Venice Lion at the Venice Film Festival, for his amazing work on Daughters of Chibok, which you can also watch during the festival. Next, we go down south to South Africa, where we have Dylan Valley, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and educator. In 2013, he received the Pulitzer Fellowship from the University of Southern California, where he completed his master's in specialized journalism. And in 2020, his virtual reality documentary, Azvuye, The Occupation, premiered at the prestigious Sundance Film Festival in the New Frontiers category. Dylan has also directed various documentaries in South Africa and for international TV. And lastly, we have Catherine Allen, who is one of the UK's leading figures in creating virtual reality. Her company, Limina, Immersive, has brought meaningful cultural VR to thousands of audience members who wouldn't have had access to this new art form. This has been done through years of VR festivals, pop-ups, and a 6-month VR theater on Bristol's Harbourside. Through doing this, Limina has learned what audiences want from both the content and overall experience. Now, the team shares this knowledge with the emerging sector in creating immersive experiences. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Feel free to unmute yourselves when you talk and join the conversation. So firstly, I guess let's have a catch up with everybody and see where everybody's at and what are you working on. Kamal, could you kick us off, please?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on this panel with all of you. I'm just really humbled by your work. So I wrote well, I did a big research project called Making a New Reality that was started in 2016 and has been has gone into blogs, has been part of a 4-year talking tour, which I had the honor some years ago, sharing some of the research. And now it has finally turned into a book, which was published in 2020. So that was a huge step for 2020. But also one of the key findings from that research, looking at equality in emerging media, that was commissioned by the Ford Foundation's Just Films. One of the key calls to action that I heard from interviewing hundreds of, over 130 people and looking at all of the research was that it is critical, especially with these emerging technologies and other kind of major things that our humanity has to face, like climate change and others, that we have to democratize the imagination of our future. We have to ensure that there are a lot of different voices participating in how we're choosing to adopt these technologies. How do we wield the power of these technologies? Who gets the opportunity to design? How does this affect our social and cultural spheres? And so that led me to be part of a design team back in 2019 that launched a new organization, a not-for-profit organization in the United States called the Guild of Future Architects. And one of our core kind of focuses is making sure that we are catalyzing a bold imagination of the future that is very intersectional, that is bringing a lot of different voices to how we are thinking about that future, particularly around emerging technologies like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and others. So that has been what I've been up to, is trying to support bold thinkers in thinking of some better ways in which we're wielding the power of these technologies.
And just for everyone to know, Kamal's book, New Realities, is available online, and I think we've put a link in the chat group, and all of you should definitely have a read. Let's hop over to Joel in Nigeria. Can you tell us where you are and what have you been up to?
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm in transit, so talking while trying to get on the plane. But yeah, VR has been an amazing experience for me. I've been making documentaries for about a decade now, but you always have this feeling that you can do more with your stories, that you can somehow push the envelope. And then someone introduced me to virtual reality. Say, hey, look, can you make me a 360-degree video? At the time, I didn't know what she was talking about, but I had to go do some research. And the first time I put on a headset, I said to myself, wow, this probably is what I've been looking for. This tool that can help me push the envelope of storytelling, this tool that can help me take people to places that they ordinarily would not be able to get access to. And so in the course of my travel as a documentary filmmaker, I've been to places that, regular people may not be able to get access to. IDP camps, war zones, Chibok, for instance. But with VR, I can take them there. I can put them in these spaces. And that for me was just so powerful, so beautiful. And when people ask me, what does virtual reality mean for you? My response is really simple. VR helps me take people to places that they ordinarily would not be able to get access to, and connect them to stories that they ordinarily would not be able to, connect to. And in doing this, also amplify the voices of people that would not be heard or would not have been heard. And so, we did in Bakassi, which was really sort of experimental. Can we do this? And the feedback was great. And so we decided to take it a step further, and we did Daughters of Chibok, because for me, 6 years ago when the story broke of the kidnap of the Chibok girls, I couldn't bring myself to believe that such a thing could happen, where 276 girls would be taken in the middle of the night. And I always wanted to go to Chibok, but obviously it's a high-risk area. It's not a place where you can get to easily. So we had to wait for 6 years to be able to go there. But I'm glad that we did, because by that time, I already had this beautiful, amazing tool called VR. And so we got to Chibok, and it really was a no-brainer for us to share this story or to tell this story using virtual reality, because the things that we saw there, I felt it was important to put the audience in this space, sit with these women, and so we did that. And beyond the award that it won, for me, I think that the biggest reward that that what VR has done for us and what that film did was the impact that it has made in the lives of the women, in the lives of the girls, in that community. Here's a community that did not have power before we came in, but as a result of this film and people being transported to this place, we had someone sign up and say, we will bring power to this community. We want to put power in the homes of these women so that their daughters can extend their reading hours. I mean, if you need any proof of the power of virtual reality, I think for me that's ample proof that it can move people from empathy to action. So yeah, that's it. And since then, we've done a bunch of other things, but I'm very passionate about using stories, using technology, using filmmaking to make a difference in communities. That's really my passion. And so if I'll be telling any other story or stories in the near future, it'll be along those lines, looking for places where people who need their voices amplified, and taking people to places that they ordinarily would not be able to get access to.
Thanks,
That's it in
Joel.
brief. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I can't attest, I actually just recently had the opportunity to go to Nigeria and to Chibok specifically. It's very hard to get to. And I think what I love about Daughters of Chibok so much is it really carried the memory and kept that alive when it happened 6 years ago now. It's very easy for people to forget and put in the past, and sort of encapsulating it in a VR story means that it lives forever, which is one of the things that I really love about the impact of VR. So thank you for that. Dylan, tell us, what are you up to?
And hi everybody again. I am currently in Cape Town, based at the University of Cape Town, and I'm teaching at UCT, and I've been teaching a class on web series. So I'm also, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually doing research through my PhD into how web series offer new forms of storytelling, but also how it offers a challenge to cultural hegemony and greater equity and that kind of thing, which I started when I was doing my master's in LA, and I did my research on Issa Rae's work at the time. So she made a web series called The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. And that became the basis for her show Insecure, which is, the HBO show, which is multi-award winning. So I'm kind of looking at how specifically Black women are using web series as a way to overcome industry gatekeepers. So I'm using an intersectional approach to that. And so I'm basically teaching a course on web series at UCT. And that's pretty much most of what I've been doing. Also being a parent and being a dad. So after Sundance happened at the beginning of the year, I moved to Cape Town, and then there was a hard lockdown in South Africa. So a lot of the projects I was super excited about trying to get started kind of took a back seat, and I focused on domestic life and doing that kind of thing. But I've been shooting a lot with a GoPro Max in terms of doing some 360 stuff just to get some practice with shooting again in 360, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, so in a nutshell, that's basically what I've been up to now.
I like how you've used the lockdown to find time to sometimes do things that you don't normally get to do. I think I've heard a lot of people say you get to focus because you're in one place, whether it's practicing your craft or developing new ideas. Yeah. Catherine, tell us what's happening with you.
Oh, it's so good to be here, especially at such a crucial point for the sector. I feel it really is. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but it really is an important moment for Immersive's future. And yeah, at the moment, I'm based in Bristol, and as you mentioned earlier, thank you for your introduction. I run a company called Limina Immersive, and up until March this year, we ran virtual reality theatres, which means essentially a place where the general public can come and experience VR day or night out, synchronized screenings, creative cultural content, so for instance sort of travel, nature, or documentary, and it was something that would really just fit as like a leisure activity you do with your friends. So the sector that we fit into is called location-based virtual reality, yeah, I set up Limina back in 2017 as a response really to seeing just how narrow the audience was to VR at the time. I mean, I guess you could say, well, what do you expect when the Oculus was only just launched and the other headsets were all still very new? But it really felt, at the time, this was sort of back 2015, 2016, I was working at the BBC. I'd produced one of their first public-facing VR experiences. It was a wonderful experience making it, but it was, I mean, honestly, it was frustrating that the audience that we had demographically was so narrow, mainly had come from the gaming audience, sort of ported over, which also meant that the feedback we got, you know, I'd made it a history documentary. The feedback that we got wasn't necessarily from the audience that we intended it for. So yeah, that was the urge to start Limina, was to meet audiences in the middle, find something that they do anyway, leisure activities, going out with friends, finding that place and time that immersive feels just normal, isn't like a trivial thing, or isn't a sort of a strange, kooky sci-fi novelty, and to just turn it into something that you would do as part of everyday life. And I think we got there, you know, we got to, we were ready to really scale big time, but we'd already got to just over 15,000 audience members. And we'd done lots of studies, thankfully. We from that opportunity, we partnered with universities to study our audience, to find out what it was that they wanted. In hindsight now, I'm so grateful to past Catherine for doing that, because present Catherine in this pandemic year, it means that I've got all this data to be using for creation, and also for a report I've written, and probably going on for future work as well. So understanding what it is that broad audiences want, that's really what we very much wanted to find out at Limina, with having run our VR theatre events across the UK and various international dates too, and having our own venue in Bristol for 6 months as well as a pop-up. So we found out a lot. We found out what it was that audiences, our audience tend to want as a sort of first time, or first few times, as a way in. And now what I'm doing, as it was for many companies, you know, it was a real blow to us when lockdown happened. We had to cancel lots and lots of events coming up. We had a tour where we had a Cirque du Soleil VR partnership, and we were touring around sort of posh department stores in the UK, and we had to well, indefinitely reschedule that. So that was quite tough for us. But actually, yeah, we're working with the NHS at the moment. We got a project with them and some funding from the government to make an immersive experience for people at home, where they can sing in nature to boost their spirits while they're stuck indoors in lockdown. So actually that's launching to the public next week. So it's a good time to be here as well, talking about accessibility, because Lost in Song, the project with the NHS, is just all about making immersive accessible and bringing that kind of mood machine capability that immersive has to as many people as possible.
Great. Everyone's doing such amazing work, and especially shifting, like I said, during the pandemic. Now, when we sort of conceived this topic about looking at equity, for me, one of my first questions was always about the difference between equity and equality, and what does equity actually mean? And sometimes I think equity is not just being in the room, but having a seat at the table. And I'm curious to hear from everyone in their different backgrounds what equity looks like versus equality and diversity. And how do you see that manifesting in your industries and the spaces that you are working in? So maybe we can start off with Kamal.
Well, I think, you know, kind of one of the kind of textbook definitions that I have heard expressed in many different ways between equity and equality is that equality means making sure that you're treating everyone the same, regardless of need, where equity is looking at really how are you treating people considering need. And I think that it gets really fuzzy when you really start to kind of break out what those nuances are. For example, when I was at Sundance, you know, we noticed that in the early parts of kind of do-it-yourself DIY virtual reality work, there was a lot of diversity in that kind of community of people experimenting, and the kind of barriers to entry were somewhat, I mean, they still were somewhat barriers, but they were somewhat more accessible. You know, people were stitching together GoPros on a pole, you know, really early work. And so for our first 2015, Shari Freela, who's the chief curator of New Frontier and really the visionary behind this move, decided to create an all VR exhibition, which was pretty bold, because all of her exhibitions as the curator in New Frontier had been, you know, a lot of different mediums in the past. This is the only and first time she had done that. And that group of people were, you know, over 68% people of color, queer, women, like very diverse. But the work was still in that early production phase where people were very much experimental. And then at that exhibition, I remember personally, you know, walking people in the room that were, you know, really the height of industry in gaming, film, television, you know, and it was interesting to witness that the people that got funded or in one way or another out of that exhibition were predominantly male, well, all male and predominantly white. And so there was this stark gap that happened in that 2015 time in terms of who got the money to further their experimentation. And 2 years later, when Shari just did a curation of what is the best and the best of the field, the majority of work that was coming back that was best of the best were male and white, but they had that funding leg up, even though women like Nolene de la Pena or Rose Trochet, people that were, you know, women, BIPOC, queer, had been doing some of the most resonant work, the work that had actually changed people's opinions about whether VR was a medium worth their investment. So it was really interesting to see. So 2 years later, you know, they're still funding out of their pocket and only able to do work that comes out like $15,000 worth of money into their, whereas we were seeing major up to $1 million investment into these other projects. And so I think, to me, that's where you have that break in, you know, everybody had this equality moment where they were at the same time, but there becomes this break in terms of who people feel comfortable in investing in. Traditionally, I mean, I went to a panel with all women feminist philanthropists, and it was 200 women that you couldn't walk into the room in this conference unless you'd given away $1 million of your personal wealth to women and girls causes. And I presented about some of the stark, you know, investment realities that I was seeing in virtual reality at that conference. And women came up to me and they said, these are women that are, you know, feminist to the core. And about 3 different women came up to me and they said, you know what? When it comes to my philanthropy, I invest in women and girls all day long. But when it comes to my business investments, I only invest in white men. I have to check that inside of myself. Like, what is it in my programming that I trust seeing a white male at the helm of a business or of an innovation more than I would trust, you know, other people? So something in there is, I mean, when you look at African Americans, they are 225 years behind in wealth creation. The average Black family compared to the average white family in America. So you can say, you know, a Black student and a white student should get exactly equal, you know, opportunities, but there's those small little differences where that wealth gap influences the ability of one person to take longer and wider strides going forward. And so that's where the equity piece comes in, because we need to understand those kinds of nuances when we're trying to create real place for shared prosperity and thriving. And I think the piece that we don't quite understand about that is that we often just think of it as pure competition when you think of equality. But the reality is, and this is where I think it breaks the whole mold of how people usually think about equality and equity, is that we are interdependent. And so that Black child not getting that equitable support to fulfill their full potential means that we all suffer ultimately, because what they had to give, which is unique and only they could give, gets left out of the shared, you know, prosperity that we all can benefit from. So that's a long-winded answer.
That's a great answer. I think taking off what you said, Kamal, I'd like to go to Dylan, because especially you're teaching and you're working in the university space. How are you seeing equity play out there, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess totally what Kamal said about it's really a complex approach to structural issues as opposed to thinking about giving everybody the same thing. But it's a more, equity is really the harder work of really interdisciplinary approach to addressing these very deep power dynamics and inequalities in society. So that's the way I think about equity work. And in the university space, it's interesting, like when COVID-19 became a reality in South Africa, we needed to move into what they called emergency distance learning, or EDL, which is basically that we teach over Zoom. So a lot of our teaching takes place like this, when we meet with students like this. And for students who come from a lower income background, obviously this is a very tough situation. So the university had to quickly come up with a strategy to deal with that inequality. So students had to apply based on need for assistance with data, for assistance with laptops. So the university is basically has basically sent out laptops, thousands of laptops to students, because in a society like ours, the inequality is so deep that just having a laptop for the majority of South Africans is a luxury. It's not a reality, right? So so that's the way we've seen it now in COVID-19, how technology is this huge digital divide that really needs some urgent addressing. And so, because also these students they're being loaned the laptops as well for the time that they need it. And ideally, we want a situation where you know, that isn't the case, where people are able to work from home without needing special assistance. But this is kind of like the realities that we are working in, and it's very important that students don't get left behind in those kinds of situations. And also, one of the things that arose from that is also people realize that even if you send a laptop and data to students, some students live in rural areas, their home is in a rural area when they're not living on campus, right? And so they're in rural South Africa, then your signal isn't always that great. You won't have fiber infrastructure, right? So you'll be using kind of mobile technology signals, right? So like towers to get your data, to your connectivity. And so even when you have all those things, students would have to maybe climb top of a hill far away from their home to get access to the internet. So those are the things that really brought all these inequalities to the fore during this time. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done just in terms of basic connectivity. So when we're talking about VR and immersive technologies, sometimes it feels like there's so much work that needs to be done just in terms of the groundwork that we haven't yet done. And so, but that's something but there is hope, of course. Hope is like a revolutionary act in itself. That I like to think. That's what I like to think of. So, so yeah, that's the way we've seen it here in South Africa at the moment.
It's interesting. I went to the same university that you teach at, and a former student said when they gave all of these students computers and the data, someone said, "Oh, that means they could have done this all along." And they knew that a lot of students didn't have computers. Why did it take a pandemic to bring out the urgent need that has clearly been there for a long time?
Yes, totally.
And someone said something. So it's interesting to see how I think even now in the pandemic, the gaps, like we're seeing the big holes that were clearly there all along, and now thinking about the work that we can do to combat that. I'd be curious to know from you, Dylan, as well. Do you think now, for instance, with people having more access to technology, even bearing in mind the circumstances that you've just described, how much of an impact we will see of that, just that little change in giving people data, giving people computers, giving people access to technology so they can continue to work at home, what effects we will see in the future?
Yeah, I think it's something that we'll have to wait and see, right? Because I mean, like, access is one thing, but it's also about how do you like giving somebody something once off doesn't kind of solve that bigger problem. So like you said, it's like if people could have been doing this all along, then we should be doing these kinds of things going forward, you know. And I'm not just talking about universities. I don't want to just put them under the spotlight, but for example, you know, like the mobile networks, they zero rated our academic website, so that, which means that students could access the learning portals for free. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, why isn't that just like the norm, right? Like, why isn't that the norm? So one of the things we have to do is start to think about post the pandemic, how to use this as opportunity to actually make the case for a better future. And one of the things I forgot to mention that I've also been up to is I've been working with this movement that started in Cape Town called Cape Town Together, and it's a decentralized movement, grassroots, kind of in response to COVID-19, and we're making a documentary together about this kind of grassroots movement, and it's a very hyper-local response. But the idea that is being pushed now through Cape Town Together is like we have to actually build, this idea of building back better, which I've seen also now being a lot of people are saying this around the world. And I think build back better is a great space to be in right now. So kind of using our imaginations to really think about what can we build now going forward. And so it'd be interesting to see like what kind of role that emerging technologies and immersive media can play in these kinds of things. So super exciting to hear what Catherine has been working on in this moment, because that's the kind of thing that I think that VR and AR as well can provide some kind of healing for all this very disruptive moment the planet is in. So and it feels like we might be getting there, right? So after this past weekend, hopefully, you know, things started getting better.
Catherine, do tell us, how have working with audiences and in the distribution space, do you find audiences have a lot of equity? What does it look like? And how has that impacted the work you guys are doing?
It's it's a really important question. It's really got me thinking, actually. And just to build, I think, on Kamal and Dylan's points, I was thinking, what's equity like from Limina's experience, and how have we brought that concept into our work? I think also when I first started, I like thinking like 2017 when the company started, I hadn't actually heard of the term, but I think I'd almost applied it like subconsciously. But so the thinking about in Bristol, when we had rewind to when we had our venue on the harbour side, so it's like a kind of mid-sized British city. It's got a shopping centre, shopping mall, and in there at the same time that we had our VR venue on the harbour side, there was also a VR arcade at the back of the main shopping mall. And we both launched actually a similar time. And interestingly as well, the head of marketing for this arcade had similar goals to me and my team about bringing accessibility to the world of immersive. The difference is, though, is that I know I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but I think Limina really succeeded. I don't know about the arcade because they were a franchise, part of a wider operation, so they didn't have control. It would frustrate him. He said he didn't have control so much over, you know, the brand assets that they would use for adverts, or the style, the layout. He had very little kind of levers to pull. So the difference between the two venues, from why did Limina succeed in having majority women audience, having the ethnicity of people coming to be reflective of the city as well. Also to, we had really great queer representation from audiences, the team. So yeah, we were great, like as good as I could have wanted to be in regards to diversity. And why is it that they seem to struggle in the shopping mall? And I think when you look at it, we thought that we saw that our audience were not of the same starting point, and we accepted that. So our audience being people who were not early adopters, and the more would be the early or late majority on that technology adoption curve. These people tend to, it's not part of their identity to want to try out new things and for that to be something that makes them who they are. So trying out regarding technology. So they're not just going to do it for the sake of it. And often the early majority or the late majority can be more skeptical and more nervous as well, and have different life experiences with technology too. So by bearing in mind that the audience we were creating this for were not people who had grown up using a games console. We didn't assume that at all. So we didn't assume that they knew how to use the controllers. We assumed that they were people who also might feel nervous about how they looked wearing the headset. We knew there may be an issue around makeup and hair. This is from just talking to lots of people, observing, seeing where the concerns lie and really what those barriers were. And we just saw that there are so many more barriers to those people who don't consider themselves the early adopters. And we tried to address every single one of those barriers as much as we could within our very, very limited budgets. And what the difference between the arcade is they couldn't do that because they were locked into this franchise. And so for them, they had a dark place where you could also, lots of different stations in an arcade style, but you were visible to people at the same time who would walk past. There was no privacy. It was also something that you're meant to go with your like friends or family, and they were like meant to watch you while you're doing the experience. Again, the privacy issue. Gaming content that was often a sort of add-on or follow-on from well-known console games. So yeah, they had a different approach, very different approach to privacy and safety. Ours was, in contrast, a light, airy space with loads of plants. We borrowed like the aesthetic of a kind of coffee shop and a spa. So it felt kind of familiar as well. We had friendly hosts, so it wasn't all self-service. Friendly hosts would welcome you. You would do it synchronized at the same time as other people, recognizing that people, when they're nervous, they tend to like doing things with other people as well, but they also don't want to be kind of watched at and observed. So thinking about privacy, thinking about safety, having a wraparound duty of care to our audience from the moment they book a ticket to the moment they leave the venue, having a decompression zone afterwards. By bearing all those points in mind, I think we were able to build from a perspective of achieving equity rather than equality. And it's actually having this conversation that's helping me really see this through this frame and being able to analyze Limina's experiences. So I think that actually that was our USP. You know, people say duty of care was our USP, or it was like going to a spa. You felt so looked after that you felt like you just had an afternoon at a spa. And that's because we just went for it on the duty of care. And that's, yeah, I think that was the secret to our success, to be honest. Yeah, equity rather than equality. Because you could have said, you know, the venue in the shopping mall, the arcade, could have said, well, anyone could book a ticket. We're not stopping people. Well, yeah, why aren't we getting more people in? They were sort of a bit confused. So yeah, I think this conversation, even so far, I feel like I've been enlightened myself, being able to look back on our experiences and what we learned through that lens.
Mm-hmm. And Catherine, I'm interested in hearing about how people have talked about sort of galleries, exhibition spaces as sometimes being a little bit alienating, or for a specific type of person who can walk into that space. How have you been working on trying to break that down?
Yeah, well, that can be such an issue, because if you have an exhibition space and you have a VR headset, say, in the corner of a gallery, then because it's self-service usually. So if you're not the sort of person who feels comfortable knowing how to use it already, or you're somebody who maybe hasn't had experience using the controllers, and you might not know how to use it. Also, you might feel nervous about your items, like your bag, your coat, especially, you know, the safety. Is things going to get stolen? It expects that you have somebody who's going to kind of keep an eye Often they don't get cleaned. There's many reasons why the gallery context, I feel anyway, from our experience, it's not right just to pop a VR headset in a corner. And what you get it, as you say, it alienates people. You can observe the people who have the guts to pick up that headset and use it. And I set my mum up actually sitting in the corner of a gallery near where she lives, where they had a VR headset like that. And she observed for quite a while. The staff must have wondered what she was doing. It was mainly young white men who would pick up the headset and have the confidence to do that. And what was a real shame was this was a Rebecca Allen exhibition, who's like a really pioneering woman VR artist from back in the like 90s and noughties. She's somebody I admire so much, and to think that the only people who felt like they had the confidence and the skills to pick up the headsets and experience her work were such a narrow demographic of people. It's pretty sad. So yeah, that I suppose I've been increasing my anguish against that kind of setup, because even you can have it in a sort of really like progressive gallery and you still get the same situation. I guess it's about who feels safe in that space, who feels that they're being who's able to feel a sense of ownership. So yeah, simple, just thinking about things that are pragmatic solutions. Scheduling the times when it starts, not having a headset where it's self-service, not expecting people to already know how to use the controls, and giving audiences that sense of privacy, and that their bags aren't going to get stolen. Those factors they help so much. And if you're looking on putting on a VR exhibition, let's say when the pandemic has passed, when there's a vaccine, then I would give those tips as to how to instantly, with a few steps, increase the diversity of your audience.
So talking about making these spaces safe spaces, not just necessarily physically, but also mentally, for people to come in and experiment and experience stuff. I'm going to try to reach out to Joel, I know, who is in an airport right now. So I'm so grateful that he still managed to connect. Joel, I would love to hear from you how you define equity. And I'm not sure if Joel, there we go.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, just forgive the in and out. It's a bit of an interesting day for me. I'm not quite the expert on this kind of subjects, right? But I'll put it as simply as possible. When I think about everything that I've listened to, Kamal, I've listened to Catherine, like amazing stuff that you guys are doing. For me, I think when I think about equity, equality, I think about access, really. How much more can we make this accessible to the people who, quote unquote, need it or who can benefit from it? So I'll give you an instance. In Nigeria, we've been experimenting with using VR as a tool for education. So we take it to like schools, where we have kids in the early teens, and we use it to take them to places. So for instance, an experiment that we did, we had a VR film that we shot in Ethiopia, and then we took it to the school in a slum. These are kids who they don't even know what a passport is, not to talk of traveling. They can only dream about it, right? But we were able to put them in these spaces and sort of gauge their reaction. How do they respond to this? Obviously, this is a technology that ordinarily would not be accessible to them in the first instance. Secondly, these are places that they most likely would never be able to go to, at least not in the near future. But using this to sort of, I don't know how to put it, is it level the playing field, kind of. Give them these experiences. They're not there physically, but they have an experience of being there. So if for any reason, discussions around or conversations around these places come up, they can in some way contribute. They won't just sit and and stay disadvantaged. So we're looking at how we can use this as a tool to sort of reach out to kids in disadvantaged communities and provide them with experiences that they ordinarily would not be able to get. Access to knowledge that may have seemed far-fetched, but now we're using this technology to bring it closer to them. You have, I don't know how it operates in other parts of the world, but in Nigeria, for instance, kids go on things like excursions, right? And these are places where they go, it's not just for fun. They go there to learn. It has a learning, an educational value to it. But they're mostly done by private schools. So these are schools where, the rich or the semi-rich go to. But what happens to kids in poor communities who they cannot go to these places, they don't have the funds to go there, their parents cannot afford to send them there? What happens? So we feel that if we can use this technology to sort of give them a chance, give them that opportunity to experience these things, it would mean a lot. And we've tried it. I remember one time we were in Maiduguri and we took this, young girls they were orphaned by Boko Haram. So they were kept in a school where they're taking care of them. And so we gave the little girl a headset, and it was a VR experience of London. And it was a 5-minute film, but she was there for like 30 minutes. It kept playing in a loop. She said, look, and so we asked her, we said, so why don't you want to take it off? Share with your friends. And she said, no, I love this place. I want to be here. I don't want to come back. But that's the beauty of this technology and what you can use it for. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that for me, using it to equalize if there's what do you call it now, whatever it is, just giving them more access to things like this. I think for me, that's what we intend to use this for. We're experimenting with it. We're seeing the results. We're seeing the impact that it's making in the lives of these kids, and it's something that we intend to pursue full time. Yeah.
It's nice talking about democratizing the industry and the playing field. I'm also curious to hear from you, Joel. You had, when you made Daughters of Chibok, you were the first African to win the Venice Lion Award in the VR category at Venice Film Festival. And when I was reading your bio, I was wondering what that, being the first African, gives you in terms of equity, whether it is in creating things, and how you even feel about titles like being the first African. I mean, that was 2019, but let's say 2020, that kind of title. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So, well, we never planned on winning. We never planned on even submitting. Judith Okonkwo insisted that I should send it to Venice. And she sent me the link, and I dilly-dallied for a couple of days, and she kept hounding me until I finally decided to send it. And I mean, the rest, as I say, is history. What it's done for me is that I think in a lot of ways, it has inspired a lot of young people back home that it's possible. And for me, that's a big deal. Unfortunately, there's an announcement coming up so I hope it doesn't disturb my audio. But yeah, that's what I think it has done for me. Because we didn't set out to win, we just wanted to share an honest story. Yes, it was a pleasant surprise. It was a big deal. It also opened a lot of opportunities for myself and my team. We met a lot of wonderful people, amazing people, and there are prospects for big collaborations. But I think what's more important is what it has done back home. So you have young guys calling me and say, "Hey, look, man, I read your story. I saw the video. I'm so inspired. How can I get into VR?" And that for me is like, yes, if we can achieve that, then yes, because there's so few of us who are doing this back home in Nigeria. I mean, if you speak with Judith, it's tough to get into. The cost of entry is so high. It doesn't seem as glamorous, and all of that. But when you see someone from Nigeria, you know, who looks like you, who talks like you, and, you know, has the same access to the same resources that you have, getting to this level, you feel like it's possible. You can do it, you know, and that for me is a big deal, because if we're gonna have to make this work, um, especially back home in Nigeria, we have to have more players in it. We have to have more players. But how can you get people to come in if they don't believe that it's possible? You know, how can you get people to come in if they feel like, it's too expensive to get in, I don't have the resources, you know, how do I make this happen? We don't have any, quote unquote, any schools or where you can go learn this, you know. But when they see stories like mine, when they see stories like Judith, then they can say, wow, you know what, this is actually possible. And so that for me is what the win has done for us. Just that ability to inspire a lot more young people. I've got like 2 or 3 guys who are interning with us now, trying to learn. And I mean, I can say that they're way more daring than I am. So I have great hopes, you know, that in the near future, you know, a lot more will come out of this space. And I intend to also use the knowledge that I have, the skills that I have, and the connections that we've built, you know, in the past 1 year, to use that to train more people. I think being able to make access to that knowledge, do you get what I mean? Like access to that knowledge, have more people come and learn and understudy us and just be with us, be in that space, would help to grow this. It's early days for us in Nigeria, in terms of, you know, the immersive industries and the immersive world. It's very, very early days. And so as many people as can come in, the more the merrier. So wins like this, accolades like this can only serve to reinforce the fact that it's possible. There's a future in this. We can do this, and we can use it to do good. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks. I love that you talked about how there are not enough people in the industry still doing the work. Like we need more people getting in. And one of the things it's made me think about is when I go back to, for instance, in my head, equity is not just about being in the room, it's about being at the seat of the table and having voting rights. But sometimes you can be in that position and still be a minority with this voting right, and you don't have the support that you need even at that level. And I'd love to hear first from Kamal, and please everyone else just jump in about what we do about that. How do we create more support when you get into the room and you're trying to be the game changer, have the voting rights, change things, but you look around and you feel so outnumbered and overwhelmed because you're the only woman there, or the only person of color, or the only African. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's real. I some of the panelists have heard me tell the story of when you know, having kind of been in the room at Sundance in 2012 when Noni de la Pena showed the first piece on the prototype for the Oculus. Like the prototype for the Oculus was created to show Noni de la Pena's piece on hunger, a documentary piece on hunger in Los Angeles, at the Sundance Festival. And I was there not as an employee, even I was there as an artist showing another interactive documentary. And so I was in the room when it was just being birthed, you know, kind of being birthed for the second wave of the hypes. I mean, you know, I want to acknowledge that virtual reality is as old as gaming, but it was like the kind of rebirth of the hype cycle with this kind of using the mobile phone as a prototype for what became, you know, this new headset innovation cycle. And you know, then I got to see how, you know, Palmer Luckey, who is her intern and the student that created that, USC student, go from there to getting you know, a Kickstarter campaign that was successful at $2 million, and then to a sell to Facebook for $2 billion in a very short time frame. So in 2 years, all that happened. So 2 years later, I'm sitting at a big Hollywood ballroom in a hotel with 1,000 developers for the Oculus Rift. And it was, I remember when I first walked into the room, this is the first developers conference for the Oculus. Out of 150,000 people that had the development kit for it, 1,000 were handpicked by Oculus and Facebook to come to this developers conference. And when I walked in the room, it's one of the few times in my life where I just felt like I hit a wall of like, whoa, you are so not the person that is represented in this room, where I was, wearing some kind of, ethnic pants. My hair was, kind of even more, curled out than it is right now. And I just remember I just walked into a wall of men and predominantly a wall of white men. And I wanted to escape. I just wanted to cringe away and go to a local coffee shop and just wait for my panel. I forced myself to stay in the room. I introduced myself, and I found that I was quite welcomed. Everybody was in a kind of a euphoric high about the possibilities of this technology. But then 2 days later at the plenary session, again, there was maybe, I counted 30 women. I mean, it was probably more than that, but that's as many as I counted. And one woman stood up and said, hey, what are we going to do about the apparent gender gap here? And basically was told from the stage that this is a meritocracy. We need the best of the best to make a return on investment for the $2 billion that Facebook has invested in this. And, the best of the best are in this room. And so there was this sucker punch to the gut for all the women in the room that was just like, you aren't the best of the best. Now that was quite contrary to what we were seeing from Sundance perspective in terms of who was creating amazing storytelling in the medium. We were seeing women and people of color doing amazing work. So it was this idea of a meritocracy is a mythology, right? It's not true. So, but what happened was, I think I talked to a lot of women that were in the space at the time, and it was just like a call to action. Like, there's no way we're ceding this technology to only men. Like these other, we're not gonna, and we know that in technology, women dropped out of technology in 83, 84. Women were gaining strides in technology, computer science specifically, at the same rate they were in other fields like medicine and law. And they dropped out in 83, 84, like off a cliff. And when news reporters were doing an investigative look at why women dropped out, it all came back to this kind of targeted storytelling that was happening from the computer companies. And then Hollywood film started to follow suit, where they kept creating the stereotype of white male tech geek as being the kind of center of the culture of technology. And a lot of women said that they started to feel like they were, not smart enough, even though when you look at their grades, they were getting the same or better grades, or they were starting to get bullied or hazed by their male counterparts. So it kind of triggered the storytelling that we saw in the 80s around who gets to be the tech innovator, kind of triggered inferiority complexes in women and superiority complexes in the men. And we lost 30 years of women being robustly involved in comp sci, and we are not the better for it, right? There are a lot of things that would have been more balanced and sociologically and all the kinds of things to have a real balanced representation inside of technology. So what I saw is women were just like, heck no, we won't go in the VR world. And by 2017, there were articles coming out that VR had more women in the VR sector of technology than any other sector. But that was not by accident. That was a response to not wanting to cede that power in that territory.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I could just chime in with my own experiences on strategies when you feel like, and when you are the only person in the room, the only woman in the room, or the only person of color in the room. And for me, I think just looking at when I was quite involved pre-VR in London's tech scene, the kind of startup scene early 2010s, and I'd experienced and witnessed some really ugly stuff, sexual harassment, that sort of thing, and friends' experiences as well. And so when I went into VR, I had this feeling of, not this time, no. Like what Kamal was saying, is this feeling, no, hold up a shield here. And which meant that I had an awareness, I think also because it was sort of, in those few years, there had also become more societal awareness as well around the importance of inclusion. And it was, you know, around time of sort of Me Too and just before that as well. And so when I went into VR, I noticed stuff, but I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. And each time I know, well, you know, a man from the game sector would, I know I'd be an industry party and I get propositioned when I really just wanted to talk to him about something work related, or every time one of those things happened, which still did happen when this was sort of 2016, 2017, it would just give me motivation because I would like log it and then it would just give me more push to want to do the thing that I was doing because that was counter that. So maybe it had the opposite effect. It was galvanizing. And then it turned out that there was lots of people also who were having similar experiences and similar, like, no, not this time, no. So we sort of grouped together to say that, no, this time VR can be more inclusive. Doesn't have to be like that. And when I ran something called the VR Diversity Initiative in the UK, that is now, it's continuing now, which is really awesome. It's still going. When I founded it, it was the first workshop that we did, and we were trolled really badly by the gaming sector, and they sort of took over our hashtag. And then I got sort of personally, I don't know if you heard of Gamergate. I sort of got personally targeted by Gamergate. But the way to, I suppose, to deal with that was, it just kind of gave me evidence that like this is because I could show screenshots. Like, look at this is happening. So logging it and then sharing it back with my allies and building that community of allies. And we have this with the same mission for inclusion. I think that's probably been the strategy, and seeing that actually you can build something in parallel. Like, I didn't even need permission from these people. Like, I didn't need to go to these industry parties and hang out with these people. I could do something different, and we could set up our own community, you know? So I think I was very lucky to have like a kind of sense of sanctuary in Bristol's Watershed, the Pervasive Media Studio, which is like a community of creatives, it's co-working, but also a community of collaborators in the city. And to have that sense of, I suppose, coming back to that theme of safety, a space of safety and sanctuary to come back to debrief and to work out our next move, and knowing that we didn't need permission. You know, we could get on with it, and we could get in our own funding from other sources and have our own allies. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that approach now in the UK, and I think internationally I can see that strategy isn't being employed by others too. So I think I have hope for the immersive sector based on, I think, the strategy that Kamal was talking about. I can see that's happened. I can see it in action.
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy that we're starting to talk about some of the gains that the industry is making in terms of creating equity. Now, it's no secret that the pandemic has been a bit hit in the industry for various reasons. For creatives, a lot of people who work independently, to VR creation, to spaces, organizations like Limina that work with people in rooms and sharing headsets and that type of thing. And just the way we lived in what I like to call the old world. And where we are now. I'd love if everyone can sort of chime in and talk about what we need to do now to preserve the amount of equity that we've been building in different spaces, different creators, content creators, technology makers, but also where we need to go forward in terms of maintaining and continuing the momentum and not letting the pandemic completely wash away all of the amazing work that's being done.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to that, and we'll just also to speak a little bit to what Catherine was saying, what Kamal was saying. I think it's really important to, in this moment, to really take stock of all these stories of kind of prejudice in tech and in these spaces, like in in film and in immersive media and that kind of thing. And there's been great work done by scholars on this, because we kind of think about tech and the internet even more broadly as neutral territory, right? But actually, it's very gendered and it's racialized. So there's a book called Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble, and another book called Race After Technology. Basically, and that's by Ruha Benjamin. I really recommend this talk by Ruha Benjamin called "The New Jim Code," which looks at, which is kind of a play on Michelle Alexander's framing of the new Jim Crow, and kind of how, kind of takes this long kind of view at how racial inequities are perpetuated. So the new Jim Code is kind of like how those inequities are still there, still here with us, with these big tech companies, but they're able to hide it more easily, right? And so, but saying that, so to answer your question in terms of where we are now, I think 2020, the pandemic and the George Floyd moment was a great time for us to really kind of take stock globally. So like, you know, looking at the resurgence of Black Lives Matter in the US, but also it sparked Black Lives Matter protests around the world. So it was the first time really that I think Black Lives Matter was a global phenomenon. And so in terms of thinking about that, we have to think about ways of building solidarity, working together. And one thing I can definitely say about being in this, starting to work in immersive filmmaking and that kind of thing is I experience a sense of solidarity there, which I think is really something great to tap into in terms of, also because there's so few Africans, as Joel said, working, and so few Black people working in the space. And that in that way, it's been a great way to kind of link up to people really excited to talk to me, even though I've never done anything like this before, but people really, I was really, really warmly welcomed by people who've been in the space for a while, like Lauren Ruffin and Lisa Osborne from Crux Media. You should check out Crux if you can. Also Black Public Media, they're doing really good stuff. So I think kind of like where I think I'm going with what I'm saying is like, I think these kind of transnational solidarities are really important and mobilization. Like Kamal was saying, it's kind of like, you know, building equity in space like this is not like, it won't happen by accident. It has to take some organization and some kind of response in getting together and communicating and building a plan. And I think that is something that we really need to look at going forward in terms of the issues we all face in our local situations and how to kind of overcome these. I think these kind of transnational solidarities and alliances will be really important. And also Catherine spoke a bit to that as well. You know, like you don't need the permission of the normal gatekeepers and so on, because this technology is moving so fast that you could often be the first in the room. Like you were saying, like this, being in the room and having a seat at the table, you could be the first one in that room to like get to the table, you know, you know what I mean? Before like someone else does, but you have to kind of be poised in the right way and be kind of connected in the right ways. And it's all about kind of us supporting each other and find new ways of working in this time. I think that's really important.
Oh, sorry, go on, Kamal.
Just real quick, Dylan named 3 of the people that he referenced are members of the Guild of Future Architects, and a big reason why the Guild formed was just that, was to create a center of gravity, locus of power around, like, you know, Sophia Noble, who wrote Algorithms of Oppression, Ruha Benjamin, Lauren Ruffin are all members of the Guild. And I think in Pervasive Media Studio and Watershed are another kind of watering hole where a different kind of power starts to connect. And I feel connected to Pervasive Media Studio. I have to say, going over there, spending time with Watershed, Claire Reddington is one of the people that, you know, really pioneered so many things that I am following her footsteps around democratized imagination and so forth. So I think you're absolutely right, Dylan. And the fact that Dylan and I got to connect through Electric South, like I feel there is power in that solidarity, real power to not cede the future to the traditional kind of inequities that we've seen. And I think we are in a stronger position now than we have been in a long time, because I think so we're seeing the old systems that are really based on hierarchical inequities crumbling. They are not working. They will not work for us. So I think I'm seeing people that I would have never thought would have shifted their mindsets, starting to open to realize that they are interdependent. They need to operate in a way that connects with the, you know, our organic or organism called humanity. So I just couldn't say more about what Dylan just said.
Catherine?
No, I just thought it would be useful to outline the challenge that I feel we have in terms of building our audience at the moment for, well, especially in VR for the sector, because to keep up this good work, really, like, you know, kind of coming back to your question, because there has been so much great work done, but we've got this challenge at the moment, which in all honesty, it concerns me, which is that the place where people would tend to experience immersive for the first time would be outside of a home, especially if it's VR. I've got the statistics on it. I should have dug it out beforehand in preparation, but it is the most common way people try it for the first time, either through education, work, or as a leisure activity outside of a home with family or friends. So if that's the way that people try immersive for the first time, what's happening in this pandemic, where yes, the sales of Oculus Quest are doing really, really well. And so we are seeing an interest in VR and also investor interest in VR like that we haven't seen before. But who are the audience for that? Who's going to buy one of these VR headsets? Because if you've never tried VR before, right? Your people you live with haven't tried it either. Your community haven't tried it. Would you just go and spend a few £100 or dollars out the blue to buy a VR headset just like that? So would you really be, it's such a risk when you've never tried it before. So that leap to get a new audience member in, I'm just thinking about the pipeline here. It's much more likely, I think, that the people who are buying these headsets are the people who are already, people they know are already using VR. They probably tried it before. So they're being converted from a funnel that was created like pre-pandemic. Or they're people who have used console games a lot and there's a title that's just launched that they already like. And so they buy a VR headset because of the games console title that's come out for VR. This tends to, just looking at the demographics there, the data in the UK on games console use, men are 3 times more likely to call themselves console gamers than women are, for example. It's really, there's lots of other, I mean, age is also a factor. Income is a factor as well. It really does tend to be something that, yeah, demographic is quite narrow. So if our audience are an extension of the gaming audience, if the game sector are, and the sort of commercial game sector, I'd say, rather than indie game sector, are claiming this space right now, where does that leave our creative side of Immersive? And all this work that we've done, we have built a really great, really like talented, diverse group of creators in this field. But how are they going to see our work? I know that sounds like a really basic question, but if we can't do location-based VR for a while, and it's not something that, you know, people aren't buying headsets unless they're already maybe into gaming or they're already kind of converted. What's the distribution routes? So I think we have to, that kind of build back better theme, you know, we've got to think, I really think we have to address this challenge. How are we going to do this en masse on the scale? And I've kind of come to the view that I really shouldn't wait around for, I'm not just going to sit, and Limina's not just going to sit and wait till it's possible to do location-based VR. Because if we do that, if we just wait, then by that time, I think that the pandemic, that window that the pandemic has offered in-home gaming style VR, they will have just taken, they'll just own it. They'll have taken that ground, they've captured it. So when we've got to find another way right now, not wait until like 2021, 2022, or not wait till a vaccine. So yeah, that's what we're attempting to do with our project Lost in Song. I have seen other, some really great like projects as well, but even redefine the concept of virtual reality coming out of, you know, the immersive theatre space, for instance. Coming from things from people who would normally also be out there with people in person are now coming to the digital sphere and doing really creative, interesting things. So I think we've got a great, like, really right, interesting space to, and group of people who can be facing this challenge. But it would be nice if we could maintain this, like, and well, crucial that we maintain this audience that we've built and this community as well, and just ensure that we keep getting that audience and we don't lose it.
Yeah, I think there was something about making the most of this moment. And I think that's one of the reasons why Electric Africa is happening right now, is trying to galvanize. And this is the first time, for instance, I think for me and probably for Dylan and Joel, where anyone from the continent can see our work, which before people was like, oh, where can you see it? And there was the challenge of either, well, there's an exhibition space, or waiting for something for it to come to a festival near you, which in Africa there is still a big challenge in terms of distributing VR and making that space more equitable. So I think, like, you're right, we have to take advantage of this opportunity and make the most of it and find different ways. And one of the questions we have actually from the audience is, what can we learn from Africa in creating equitable storytelling? And so I think, I don't know, I'll be biased and either start with Joel and then go to Dylan, and then Kamal and Catherine, I'd also love to hear from you as well. Joel, are you still there? Yeah. Oh, you're in the plane. I feel like we've been on this journey with you. Getting back to Lagos.
Can you give me that question again, please?
Yes. There's a question from the audience which says, what can we learn from Africa in creating equitable storytelling?
You know what I'm gonna do? If you don't mind, I'll answer this. There's a question here I see about how will a videographer, documentary filmmaker switch easily to VR?
Oh, I haven't seen
that's a question. That's a question that I think is right up my alley.
Okay,
I'm
go
a
for it.
documentary filmmaker, and I switched to VR. And I would say, first of all, if you love it, I mean, if you tested it and you feel that it can help you push the envelope of storytelling, you should go for it. Now, he asked a question about using the GoPro Fusion to make films. It's an amazing camera. We made Daughters of Chibok with the Omni, and we didn't have a monitor. So we would set up the camera, set up the shots, go around the corner, and hope and pray that the shot would work. That's what we used to make Daughters of Chibok. So if you already have the Fusion and you can monitor your shots, you're good. I would say there's a ton of information online. If you want to reach out to me directly, I can give you whatever tips I can. But just go out there and do it. That's the only thing. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but just go out and do it. That's really the only way you know if it can work or not, right? Everybody else can tell you everything, but until you try it out for yourself, you will never know if it works or not. So I'll say go out there and do it. It's a whole beautiful world out there in VR waiting for you to explore. So take your Fusion out and go explore. Yeah. And I'm gonna sign off now because the doors are shut. So you guys have fun. It was really, really nice hanging out with you all, and I hope that I can connect, with you all individually some other time. Kamal, lovely, lovely, lovely listening to you. Catherine, everyone, Dylan, you guys have a lovely, lovely session. Yeah, take care.
Thanks, Joel, for joining us.
Yeah, bye.
And have a safe flight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so back to everyone else, and I do love what Joel signed off with saying is sort of get out there, do it, and the first step is trying. And one of the things I can pipe in and say that I've learned in my experience is that I made a film in Chad with Kenyan, South African team, and we wouldn't have been able to pull it off, but one of the things I like compared to traditional storytelling and documentary, which is where I come from, is because we're so few in the game, everybody's willing to work together and problem solve and help and say, this is crashed or this is overheating, or especially back in the day, like with the stitching crisis. Oof. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows, like, we're all on the Facebook groups saying to each other, like, what can we do? And people come and give you solutions from different parts of the world. And it's a very collaborative process and industry and culture. So I think that's one of the things you should take off is just like do it, and also don't be afraid to reach out to people. Is one of the things that I'll say. It's such a team effort type of work, which is one of the beauties of it. And so I guess we have about 10 minutes left. So, and if there are any other questions, please do add your questions, send them to the panel, or to the Facebook, and we'll try answer them in the next 10 minutes. But I do want to address this question about, what we can learn in the continent and what's being done about creating more equitable storytelling.
So I could answer a little bit, I think, which is when I started working in film and television, it was I was and I still am a documentary filmmaker. So I came up in the documentary community basically in Cape Town. And what I would say about that is, I think in Cape Town, but also in South Africa more broadly, I think there's a real sense of community when you're working as a documentary filmmaker. And that's also, like we mentioned earlier, that's something that's created as well, right? So I think that's something that you need to nurture and work at in terms of creating the sense of community. I think that could go a long way to creating a more equitable storytelling. But also, if you're thinking about when you're actually in production and you're making something and you need to tell a story, it's also about trying to undo the ways in which we understand what filmmaking is, or digital storytelling from a Western point of view. Coming from film studies in particular, it's this idea of the auteur, right? And kind of understanding, kind of thinking about this one genius who's like usually a man, and usually like a European man, like a Godard or whatever, who came up with this, this great style and things, this one artist. But that's never really true, even in those contexts. People are always influenced by others, and they work together as a team to make this film actually happen. Like it takes a village, as you said. So it's like, I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, and to try and start to work in alternative ways. And that's something I've been doing recently in the different projects I'm working on. Like, it doesn't always, there's always like mixed results, right? It's not like a completely decent, like a horizontal way of working is going to be like just super efficient and great. But you can start to learn other ways of doing things, and the project can become something else. And letting go of that wanting to be the voice of the film and being the great director and that kind of thing, you gain a lot. And that's like a whole conversation another time. I don't have a lot of time for that. But in my experience, it's been really amazing kind of working in a more horizontal way. So like undoing these hierarchical structures of filmmaking. And I think, again, I think VR is a great space to do that. And with Azibuya, I really feel like we did that, and also in a sense collaborated with the participants in the film, and had like a micro crew. Like, it was just me and Caitlin was the producer who was shooting it, and we had one editor, Stephen Abbott. So but that's a whole other conversation itself. But I think it's that goes some ways to get to creating more equitable storytelling, I think.
And I just want to say that I think one of the important aspects of, like, the way that I read that question was, what can we learn from Africa in creating equitable storytelling? So like, I'm thinking, what does the rest of the world learn from Africa? And I think one of the things that's really important is the narrative. Like, I was on the phone with somebody who was an activist in racial justice work in the United States, and they were saying, well, Black people are 100 years behind in terms of filmmaking, because we're the 100 years behind, and I was like, well, what about, and I started pointing out early Black independent filmmakers that had made up to 40 films within the first 15 years of the medium. So, and that influenced the way film, and I just want to make sure that we really get clear about the influence of Africa on technology and the deep history there. I mean, social media itself, the very first social media website that ever existed, that wasn't just a chat room, was called blackplanet.org. And that was started by Omar Wasso, who was half Nigerian. And he said that he was trying to create a call and response website in the 90s. And that call and response cultural norm is what influenced the development of one of the most kind of disruptive technologies in human history. And so I just want to make sure that as we think about, I really want to just kind of anchor that in the last few minutes, that there are there is so much already that Africa has contributed to technology and continues to contribute, and we want to make sure those stories are centered and not marginalized, because we forget in our own heads the the high stakes of us forgetting those narratives, you know.
I think I completely agree with you, Kamal. Like, just to give an example in virtual reality of where I'm on the board and involved in a festival called Encounters Film Festival, which happens in Watershed in Bristol, and an example of how the work of Nyendo McKee has impacted us from her piece Nairobi Berries. That has really inspired many creators in Bristol, because so her work, her piece Nairobi Berries, it won the Encounters Award a few years ago, and was seen. We had a VR theatre there at Encounters Festival. It was seen by many people. Several hundred creatives internationally, and also from the sort of southwest UK area. And I've seen the impact of her work on the community, and seeing expanding our notion of narrative and surrealism can be like so powerful in virtual reality. And so I've just seen like a direct example of what you're talking about. And yeah, it's very true. It's really, yeah. And if I just give her work as one of many examples of how we've been inspired here in Bristol in the UK.
Now, I guess we have 2 minutes left. This has been a great conversation. I don't know how it went by so quickly. But I guess I'll just want to hand over to each one of you, if you could give some parting words of inspiration of where we are going forward. And especially advice on people who are interested, have sort of the peripheries of the immersive world, are thinking about dipping their toes in, and how do we get them on board? I'll start with, okay, Catherine.
Ooh, my mantra at the moment, I just keep coming back to it, is that the audience of today are the creators of tomorrow. So let's make work for diverse audiences in order to solve a problem that we have in the industry, as well as to who the creators are. It's a cycle. So if you make work for diverse audiences, then that's the sector that we will have in the next decade or so, those people.
I love that. Dylan?
Yes, I mean, I love that too. I couldn't have said that any better. And I would just say we need to, on the continent, we need to do more things like this, and, you know, find these solutions, like Catherine was saying, like in this moment in COVID, when we can't have these events in person where people can use the headsets. We really need to do more things, more initiatives like this that Electric South is doing to really solve some of these problems, and the solutions are out there. So we just got to work together.
One of the things that I've seen very powerful with virtual reality is some people that have been taking the process of world building, and which, you know, VR makers are world builders, not just filmmakers or game makers, and the way in which bringing together an intersectional group of people to imagine and co-create their future with a collective wisdom, and then having virtual reality and these kinds of immersive technologies create that simulation of that vision so people can feel an embodied and lived experience of that potential future, has been really powerful. Something that we've been seeing in the Guild of Future Architects from different members' practices, in actually helping us to recenter any toxicity in our thinking about what our futures can be. It's very healing. And so I just want to encourage those of you that are creating aspirational views into what might be, that is incredibly useful to us to achieve those futures. So thank you.
Amazing. And I think my final piece of advice would be, if you don't see the world you want to see in the art that you're experiencing, go make it. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for participating. I would thank our audience, for people who will watch this afterwards. Dylan, Kamal, Catherine, and to Joel, who's in the air right now. Thank you so much for taking the time and having this amazing conversation. I completely agree, we need to do it way more. And in a way, I'm sort of grateful for us being creative in the current times in terms of coming together and having these conversations. So it's sort of like, let's keep on building from where we are. There's also been an amazing set of links that we've seen being shared throughout the chat, amazing reading material, watching material as well. So please do check that out. And just a shout out to everyone in terms of the Electric Africa Festival. Tomorrow on the 10th, there's going to be another kind of dying artist one-on-one conversation with the writer and the producer Amy Lewis Wilson on her 360 piece. So please check that out. That'll be a conversation with Kirsten Lee Gray. And also there's a lot of amazing work that's being shown right now, including Dylan's work, Azuye, Daughters of Chibok by Joel, Lelak by myself. Yes, I'm promoting myself. Sometimes you got to be your own hype man. And everyone else who's contributed to the festival. Thank you so much. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Yeah, and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.